Today's story was written by Reddit user Hybrid Phoenix King. Crack! He cursed, the foreign tongue of the alien bastards ringing out at the sound of the branch snapping underfoot. He couldn't see the damn thing under the thick snowfall, but its frozen bark easily made its entrance as he stepped, and now the Wentiran soldiers knew where he was. As the sound of laser fire began, splintering the air with hot blasts of energy, exploding trees around him as he did his best to sprint through the deep and unforgiving snowdrifts that littered this stretch of the Michigan Upper Peninsula forest. He groaned as he continued to run, the ache of his stomach doing its best to slow him down. The alien soldiers had done their best to give him and his squad little to no reprieve, as they had realised their mistake when they attacked their first Michigan towns, and attempted to siege the small kingdoms of hunters that traced back generations. The guerrilla tactics of hunters hiding amongst the trees and picking them off at a distance from every direction had given them a hard lesson. Now he was alone, his squad killing many of the Wentirans, but for every 5 they downed, he would lose a soldier. Damned it all that the aliens had 25 soldiers in their camp. He grinned to himself at that, noting the 6 silhouettes in the moonlit darkness. Only 6. They gave as good as they got. Of course, as he was gloating to himself, he lost his footing and careened into a tree face first. He lost consciousness for all of a few minutes, but that's all it took. As he tried to rise, he glanced over just in time to get a swift kick to his aching stomach, forcing him to throw up what little he had managed to eat in the past few weeks, the few scraps and skinny squirrels that barely quenched his and his brother-in-arm's hunger. He could barely comprehend that he was being dragged after that, too dizzy and nauseous. He barely felt the heat from the small fire. It barely helped in a Michigan winter, especially the one that had challenged the northern edges of the country this year, right on time to piss off the alien menace, whose metal suits were ill-equipped to deal with temperature fluctuations of the odd climates in the United States. Next thing he knew, he was strung up, almost like the dude from the Bible, the Jesus fellow. He had never been one for Christianity, but everyone knew about the cross. He almost laughed at the irony of him not going to church, but the church coming to him. But perhaps that was the hunger talking. His stomach gurgled and cramped, and he cringed in the pain at the reflex of trying to curl up on himself. The odd clamps on his arms held firm and dug in sharply as he did so, causing more pain. The Wentirans seemed almost amused at this, and while most didn't bother with dirt kin tongue, the biggest of the bunch stepped forward, his almost shark-like features sporting a razor-sharp grin. It was just like a great white, if not for the 4-clawed hands, and the rat-like 2 front teeth, also razor-sharp. "Tell us, dirt man, what are you doing out here? If you do not tell me, I will not feed you." The Bruce the Shark lookalike stared him down with a cocky shark grin as he opened his mouth, but it contorted into an odd frown at his words. "Dakota Black Crow, Chief Petty Officer, 67557899492. The Wentiran rolled his odd pale eyes. Interesting that they shared a common sign of mild irritation. Before speaking, "I have seen other dirtmen do this, and like them, your defiance shall not last." The Sharkman said dismissively, in his odd gravelly version of English, as Dakota stared him down stubbornly. "We shall see if your strength lasts as long as your stomach does, dirtman," the alien said finally, and sat next to the dwindling fire, a dead machine he recognised as one of their heaters weakly flickering beside it. As the hunger came clawing back at him again, he stifled a groan. He looked around into the cold, windy forest around him. At this point, the last small scrap of food he had been the skinny leg of a squirrel, not even cooked, and he had just thrown that up. He had to assume that hunger was what was making him see the odd figure in the distance, crouched in the snowy trees, its pale white skin easily camouflaging it in the pale downpour. He remembered an old tale his grandmother used to tell him, about not whistling at night, lest you draw the wrong attention, and never in the woods. She had described a spirit of hunger and fury that would hone in on trespassers in its territory, and he couldn't suppress a chuckle. Of course, as he was at death's door, being starved by aliens, did an ancient hunger spirit finally find its way out of his dear grandmother's stories and into his life? It seemed transfixed on him, its hunched figure tilting its head back and forth as if waiting for a signal. "Screw it, got nothing better to do," he whispered to himself, and whistled sharply. It was a long, drawn-out whistle to get someone's attention, the sound similar to a loop-de-loop in his head. The Wenterans jumped almost out of their skin and began to laugh, before one of them boxed him in the ear, snarling something in Wenteran about being too much of a pain. Probably was pretty spooky to have someone loudly whistle in the dead of a winter night, moon shining, wind... Wait. He paused and twisted slightly, and while he could hear it, the wind didn't touch him, nor did the fire flicker with its pull and push. He glanced back where he saw the pale figure, and they were gone. But as soon as he looked back at the Wenterans, he groaned in pain, his hunger suddenly spiking. They barely paid him heed, only barking out something to one of the sentries in the distance to check something they had noticed. He sat there groaning and twitching for a few quiet and still minutes, before a roar of pain and screech of rage brought the Wenterans to their feet and hands on their guns. The big one spoke their tongue into a small transmitter on one of their wrists and snarled at the lack of response. Two more Wenterans charged into the snowy night after their comrade, and the silence that followed made Dakota chuckle again. No noises came this time, but neither did any correspondence from the two that ran after the noises. Dakota began to quietly whistle, his hunger pains growing even worse as the fire began to dim before dying, and then the wind went dead silent. Everything was quiet besides his light whistling, and the Wenterans began to mutter and group up, the three that were left back to back with their rifles raised against the threat. He chuckled again as he saw something pale in the moonlight slink in the tree branches, almost magically avoiding branches that would creak or moan. He knew he was a dead man, but he hoped the creature would take them first. He was reaching the end as it was. The hunger pains, combined with the growing dribble of red out of his mouth, told him something that might have been punctured when he laughed before whistling some more. The big alien grabbed him by the face and spoke in his gravelly English again. "What have you done, dirt man? What have you brought down upon us?" Dakota just grinned a red grin and glanced behind the Wenteran, the alien following his gaze to where he had been standing with his battle brethren, whom had now disappeared. The Native American man just shook his head with a red grin and went, "Dakota, Black Crow, Chief, Petty Officer, 6-7. The alien stared in disbelief as the dirt man's eyes rolled up into his skull and his head lulled in the Wenteran's grip. He snarled and let go, and turned, meaning to raise up his rifle to trace for threats. But a pale, clawed hand stabbed into his armoured neckpiece like it was made of pup's mud sand. The creature screeched as it easily deflected his rifle hand, and barely registered the other three trying to push or pull it off. Even standing a head and shoulder above the creature, its pale, fanged face easily latched onto his now open throat, and his gurgled cries of pain were unheard by any, including the creature who tried in vain to sate its hunger.